Hi, everyone. Ed DeMarsh here. Please take 2 seconds to hit like, follow, share down below. It helps us beat the YouTube algorithm, which is very important. And also, please check out trendsjournal.com. That's trendsjournal.com. 40 years of providing subscribers the world's best trend forecasts. We are 100% independent. We take no orders from anyone, and we answer only to our subscribers. It is a must read for everyone who wants to stay ahead of the game. That's trendsjournal.com. Thank you, as always, for watching and for your support.
Our position on the Ukraine, to put it in a nutshell, is that there is a need to eliminate the primary causes of that crisis, the primary root causes that the West has been creating for many years in order to turn the Ukraine into a security threat against our country, trying to create a stronghold against Russia right at our border.
Well, anytime there is a diplomatic issue, to put it diplomatically, between us, the transatlantic partners, I'm sure that the Kremlin is enjoying it. I mean, and they will use it as they best can. As we saw, Foreign Minister of Russia, Lavrov, puts out a tweet and saying that for the US, Greenland is what Crimea is for Russia. And obviously, that's an insult. And we all understand that. So we always have to be careful with the Russians because they will use any moment and any possibility for good old information warfare and propaganda.
Hello, my name is Ed DeMarsh with the Trends Journal. I'm happy to be here today with Chay Bowes, the journalist based in Russia. You could find Chay on X. Chay, thank you for joining the Trends Journal.
Great to be here.
Is Russia sitting back enjoying seeing Trump almost dissolve at least publicly, dissolve what looks like the relationship between the U.S. and Europe? I mean, for the first time in a while, first time ever, it seems as though Europe and the U.S. were actually considering potential military action, or at least an invasion of some sort in Greenland. Is this something that Putin's sitting back watching and enjoying, Chay, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think anybody's enjoying it, but there's a German word called Schadenfreude, which you may or may not be familiar with, which, it does what it says in the tin. I mean, the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the Venezuelans, anybody who's been under the microscope of this international rules-based order, which isn't an international rules-based order, now we hear from Mr. Carney, the Canadian leader. Anybody who's been a subject of that, or the gross hypocrisy of it, is obviously looking now at these so-called partners nibbling away at each other in the tank, and kind of sort of being amused by it. I'd say that everybody's amused by it. Most commentators are amused by it. And so I don't think anybody's enjoying it or anything. Nobody wants the instability, least of all the Russians. I don't think they do at all. I mean, they want this war over. They didn't want it to begin, but they weren't really given much option, in my view, as to having to intervene in Ukraine after the determined efforts of the West to light this fire, this civil war, which led to this terrible conflict now that's in its fourth year. So I don't think anyone's enjoying it. I think this is just typical from Mr. Stubb. He's the Finnish leader who, I don't know, can you take him seriously or not? I mean, everything is going to be Russia's fault. Your daughter slips on her wedding day. Your wife has an affair with the boss. It's all Vladimir Putin. So, I don't take anything they say seriously because they're not serious people themselves. I mean, if they were, they wouldn't have allowed themselves to come into this position of vassal semi-states of the United States of America. They would have had some sovereignty, and it never would have been the case where an American president of any ilk or background, Democrat or Republican, would ever have even considered putting people under the pressure that they're being put under at the moment. Because remember, Europe has nothing to fire back really at America with. They've allowed themselves to become vassal states economically to the United States, militarily. I mean, there's over 70,000 US troops tonight in Europe, hundreds and hundreds of warplanes, helicopters, missiles. I mean, Europe is essentially a junior partner in a very abusive relationship with post-war America, and we understand that because they've basically followed them into numerous cataclysmic wars. And they don't have any receipts. They don't really. And Mr. Trump is doing now, as I've said recently, actually, that Donald Trump is doing now what the American empire has done for decades in the post-war period, but he's just doing it overtly. He doesn't have the finesse to lie as well as other presidents have done. Obama, the man who received a Peace Prize, who droned more weddings than a bad wedding singer, than Clinton, an exceptionally dishonest man, and his wife, who've been involved in the perpetuation of some of the most horrendous wars. Bush, Iraq, Afghanistan, the list goes on. But they've done it under this fake banner of, democracy, freedom, the rules-based order. Whereas Mr. Trump is just honest. He says, look, it's the Don Roe doctrine. We don't really care what you think. We think we need Greenland for our security or for its resources, or so that I can get a chapter in the history books of the guy who doubled the size of the United States of America. Whatever his reasoning is, I actually like Donald Trump for that.
What the honesty is,
the honesty and
for
the naivety and for his honesty. I like it because he's not trying to pretend anymore. And America is just being America. It's being,
America is just being America.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I just think there's an honesty to Donald Trump. And I think there's also some sincerity to him, although I get awful pressure in Russia when I say, oh, they're sincere because they supply so many weapons, that they supply so much money and weaponry to the Ukrainians and to the enemies of Russia. But I still think there's a sincerity to Donald Trump. Remember, he doesn't really need to do any of this. He's a very wealthy man. And I think, you have to give some credit to him for what's happened in Gaza. At least ostensibly, a lot of the killing has stopped. It's not a very well thought out piece. But I think he is putting effort into peace. It's up to people to pick up the pieces that he smashes through. Like he charges through a wall. I don't even think he has got the right people around him right now to advise him on what's actually happening. He said today or yesterday that his NATO partners in the UK hid in the front lines when they were in Afghanistan. I'm a dedicated opponent of the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Korea, Vietnam. I mean, they're all wars of profit and manipulation. But Donald Trump gets it so gloriously wrong sometimes. It's a mixture of shock, awe, and entertainment value is remarkable with this guy.
We have traditional people who are establishment writers in the U.S., and I'm sure you read them. Peggy Noonan, you mentioned before, if your wife cheated on you, you'd blame Vladimir Putin if you're in the United States. So Peggy Noonan, in today's column, it was the top of Drudge Report. She wrote, she wondered if Putin whispers the kind of to antagonize Trump with the Europeans during their phone calls, and says, Donald, you can't trust your so-called friends. So if Peggy Noonan's writing that in the Wall Street Journal, that's generally, I feel like, establishment, true establishment speak. Do you think that Putin is influencing Trump in any kind of way behind the scenes to try to separate the U.S. from Europe at all?
Well, again, Realpolitik. I mean, I'm interested in that school of political thought. Again, Donald Trump is only being influenced and influencing. Remember, the Russian state, the Russian Federation as it is now, and it's forward the Soviet Union and the United States of America have two of the biggest intelligence and national security organizations on earth. They literally have hundreds of thousands of people working for their national security operations. The American system is far more aggressive and well-funded globally than the Russian one is. The Russian SVR, the Foreign Service, the Internal Security Service, the FSB. So to suggest that either of these giant nuclear powers, Russia, the biggest landmass, biggest nuclear arsenal on earth, America, the biggest economy, probably the biggest military, Russia close second, that they're not trying to influence each other is exceptionally naive. Of course they're trying to influence each other. Are you, as a CEO of a big company, is he trying to influence, is Tim Cook trying to influence the head of NVIDIA? Is Musk trying? It's the same dynamic, I think. So to suggest that they're not trying to influence each other would be naive. I think they are trying to influence each other. I think Donald Trump has an ego. which is susceptible to not just political influence, but to the idea that he's so desperate to be the greatest. He's neglecting the mechanisms by which to achieve any greatness. And in my view, that's the problem. Again, but I say that in a sincere way. I'm not trying to diminish him or be high-handed about Donald Trump, because he's not a politician or a career politician, doesn't have a history in statesmanship, etc.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be high-handed or aloof about this in some sort of intellectual way. It's not what I'm saying. But I think he's not an intellectual match for somebody like Vladimir Putin, a man who served in the KGB. He was a major, speaks a couple of languages, a very well-educated man. As we know, he's a very well-educated man, reads a lot of history, understands the mechanisms of geostrategic crafts, statesmanship. Vladimir Putin. Whatever you think of Vladimir Putin is almost irrelevant. If you look at his track record in the post-Soviet period, when Russia was a crippled, bleeding out society, Vladimir Putin is widely and correctly credited with resuscitating Russia into a global power again, modernizing its military, getting the oligarchs under control. Donald Trump as well has got a lot of stuff done as well. I'm not trying to compare the two, an apple and an orange. They both have their qualities and downsides, I'm sure. But is Vladimir Putin trying to influence Trump? I don't think Donald Trump is influenceable, because I don't think he's a man that's prone to taking too much advice, because his position and statements on things like Russia, suggesting that, the United States won the Second World War, that's one of the most bizarre statements any president could make.
You're talking about Davos, when he said you'd be speaking German right now. And
look, the Russians lost 27 million people during the Second World War. It's an exceptionally live, pertinent thing, even today. I mean, there's not a family alive in Russia that doesn't have somebody. It's a very connected, real, living history. Vladimir Putin lost his own brother during the siege of Leningrad, which has been celebrated. The relief of the siege has been celebrated at the moment in St. Petersburg. And in that city, Leningrad lost more people than the combined war dead, military and civilian, of the United States and the United Kingdom put together in one Russian city. And statements like Vladimir Putin saying, we won the war, the Russians helped us, and this type of stuff. It's just, I don't think it's aggressively deployed, because I don't think he's informed well. I think his advisors on Ukraine are very poor. He appointed Keith Kellogg, this very elderly, almost delusional character, very pro-Ukrainian.
So why would he do that? Why would Trump, if he's so interested in making relations with the U.S. and Russia better, and he was sincere about that, why keep Kellogg anywhere near his position right now as a special envoy to Ukraine? Why have Marco Rubio, a Russia hawk, as your Secretary of State? Why have Ratcliffe, another hawk for Russia, as your CIA director? Yeah. Trump, this is one of the things that's confusing about Trump, is that he says one thing, and then his actions seem to suggest that he's interested in doing another thing.
Yeah. Well, again, it also speaks to the lunacy of this. Putin Trump is an asset of Russia. This is insanity. Okay, there's so many things that Donald Trump could do differently if he was an asset of the Russians, or if he was working to I think, again, it comes down to naivety, and I think it comes down to relationships. I think Donald Trump is a man who's very interested in relationships with people, rather than the sort of intrinsic value and capabilities of people as statesmen. Remember, Marco Rubio called Donald Trump a couple of years ago a bad used card salesman, a fraud. He called it several times. They're not traditional allies with Rubio. So there's wheels within wheels, and I don't understand, as you say, the mechanism by which a lot of this is deployed. Because remember, in the United States of America, and you know this better, and your viewers as Americans will understand, that the machine of the media is an integral part of the political machine, and the political machine is an integral part of the media, and likewise, they are the same microcosm. The White House, who gets what, But Donald Trump has disrupted that to a great extent as well. So he's a disruptor. So he's damaged a lot of those nodes that would have been guaranteed in a more stable political environment, let's say. And he's kind of using a sledgehammer to smash nuts. Like he's made a lot of enemies for himself within the intrinsic political machine within the United States, definitely in the media and on what is now considered a left-wing media, CNN. I never would have considered CNN and mainstream American media as left-wing, but they're now called left-wing, which is remarkable to me. He's fallen out with these guys, so it's a remarkable place to be. And like we said before we began our discussion, we're living in this remarkable post-truth reality. Remember, it seems that the president of the United States can say anything he wants on a Monday, completely counteract that on a Tuesday. On a Wednesday, deny he said it at all. On a Thursday, say it all again. And on a Friday, say none of it ever happened. And that's where we live. That's the world we live in. And it just goes to show the power of the United States of America. And I've said this recently. I was talking to George Galloway about this, that what all of this is doing, in my view, is showing that the American empire is moving into its final phase, because I don't think anybody in the United States, in the political machinery, in the business machinery, or in the media machinery of the United States can allow an emperor Trump to happen again. I think they're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Even if his successor takes power, somebody like Vance, they're going to have to be controlled and cooled and messaged better, because Trump is a man of his age. He's a man of great privilege, a man who started a bit, worked very hard all his life, started his first business with a small loan from his father of $1 million, I grew up in a very...
I heard different things. I heard different things about how much he got from his father. I thought it was, I heard that he got like $500 million from his father.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. So I don't think he's a Horatio Alger story, but anyway, but Chay, like here's a question. I read this and I don't have the quote in front of me, but it was in The Economist, and it talked about how Trump and Putin both position themselves as strongmen. And well, at least that's what the article contended. And it said that Trump's essentially eating Putin's lunch because he kidnapped Maduro. Maduro was an ally with Putin to a degree. He's seizing Russian flagged tankers that have ties to Venezuela oil. There's even reports that the US CIA was behind the drone attack on Putin's home. Or I think it might have been late last year or earlier this year.
No, it was earlier this year, yeah.
So tell me, is Trump having his way right now? Is he eating Putin's lunch? And why would Putin keep letting Trump have these wins?
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting question. And, I'll begin with a quote by a very famous Frenchman, Napoleon Bonaparte, who very famously say, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. Okay? And what do I mean by that? Well, it means the European Atlantic Alliance is collapsing in real time. And much like the Soviets used to say, we don't really need to destroy capitalism. Capitalism will destroy itself. We don't need to invade Europe. There was never a plan for the Soviet Union to invade Europe. So the Russians are basically sitting back and watching the European Union cripple itself as an economic power, as a geostrategic power. There is no power in Europe. They're middle and small powers now, essentially vassals to the United States, to a very turbulent and unpredictable United States at that. Why, to the second part of your question, why is he allowing Maduro to be captured? I believe that the capture of Maduro was an arranged thing. I think the whole Venezuelan security architecture was hollowed out by the CIA. I wrote about that. A couple of people I spoke to who may know suggested to me not in Russia. And the fact that with a very advanced anti-aircraft system, that the Venezuelans didn't shoot down a single helicopter or fire one of their 5,000 man-portable rockets at these helicopters, which flew into Caracas with great impunity. And the other fact that only Cubans died defending Maduro, it tells you an awful lot about what's actually happened in it was almost abduction by appointment, Plus, you got to understand the scale of the war in Ukraine is almost incomprehensible to Western commentators who've never been to Russia, who don't understand the scale of it. The number of men. At the moment, tonight, as we speak, there are 1 million men engaged in combat on the front line, at least 1 million. Probably 400,000 on the Ukrainian side and probably 600,000 on the Russian side. 1 million men, 1,000-kilometer long front line. Nothing has been seen like this. Even in the Second World War, the scale of this conflict would have been incomprehensible. And Russia has tried to maintain a stable civic society through this. There's been no forced conscription. There's been no real clampdown in the economy. There's been no erosion of civil power through this. Russia isn't fighting in a war economy even at the moment. The Russian economy is suffering. Of course it is. No country benefits from a long war. But the scale of this is very important. And what the Russians need to do and want to do is finish the war in Ukraine. They don't have the resources, either fiscal or military, to save the Syrian regime if it so decides that its own military abandons its post and runs away. They don't have the energy or sort of determination to stop America intervening in its hemisphere to remove Mr. Maduro. And the dogs in the street knew that the Americans were coming to do this. If there was a serious plan to defend Venezuela, for Venezuela to defend itself, forget about Russian intervention. Venezuela has one of the biggest paramilitary forces in the world, like over 1 million men under arms. Where were they on the night these helicopters, which had been sitting offshore for many, many weeks, if not months, decided to land these 80 special forces into the city and leave with Mr. Maduro? So I don't think the task was for Russia to stop it happening. And something that is very important for your viewers to understand is that while Ukraine is very important, while Venezuela is important, while what's happening in Iran is very important, for the Russians, the key issue here is to try and develop, in my view, stability on its own borders, which it's going to do in Ukraine. It's either going to end it on the battlefield, excuse me, or it's going to do it by negotiation, but only when the Ukrainians have been pushed out or left the Donbass region. That's the only way this is going to end. It's never going to end until there is no one left to oppose. The root cause of this conflict, as Sergei Lavrov has said, have to be addressed, because the Russians aren't going to end this war to allow their kids to fight another one. It's just not going to happen. So in the context of the scale of the conflict, the scale of the war, the socio-economic war on Russia from over 60 countries, remember, there's sanctions, and thousands and thousands of sanctions. Russia, the most sanctioned country on earth. Russia has its hands full. It doesn't need to be propping anybody up really in real time. And I think if you were thinking that Donald Trump was a mastermind of international geostrategy, you might say, well, while Russia's got its hands full in Ukraine, maybe I'll do a bit of housekeeping in Iran and Venezuela. Maybe that's the case. But it also means that when this conflict ends in Ukraine, as it will end, it has to end, and it has to end sooner than later. Russia will then be turning its eyes to countries like, in my view, Azerbaijan, to Armenia, to other places, and saying, well, look, now we've got one of the biggest armies on the earth, the biggest combat army on earth, definitely the most combat capable military on planet Earth is a Russian army, remember?
The most seasoned after the war. They had the most experience out of the battle.
There are millions of combat veterans now. Russia, by the end of this year, will have more drone operators than there are men in the United States Marine Corps. Currently, there are 80,000 dedicated combat veteran drone operators, and this is the future of warfare. By the end of the year, there'll be 160,000, and by the end of the next year, there'll be 300,000 men in that core of the army alone. This is a remarkable scale. And again, it's important to understand scale, because every one of these soldiers needs to be paid. Every one of them needs to be fed, cared for, and this is a massive undertaking for any state. And Russia is advancing. Whatever they say about the economy and this, that, and the other, the Ukrainians are desperate for men. They've lost well in excess of 1 million people dead. 400,000 people have deserted from their military. That's just not happening in Russia. And all this projection about these numbers, it's just laughable because, living in Russia, you very quickly realize this is just insane to even suggest. Like, I think at Davos, it was suggested 30,000, 35,000 men were killed in a week. It's just laughed at here. It's just nobody believes this stuff. You don't see it. You would know. You would see that scale, as you do see in the Ukraine. These vast cemeteries, groundwater destroyed. The Red Cross with 400,000 inquiries about missing people in Ukraine from the Ukrainian side. 400,000. I mean, it's quite a remarkable scale. It's almost World War I scale. So this idea that it's Russia's responsibility to ensure at all costs that there's no regime change in Venezuela, much like in Syria, Russia's still got its bases in Syria, even though Mr. Giuliani is there. It still has its bases there. The Russian Foreign Ministry has met with Mr. Al-Jolani or the new Syrian leadership. It's about pragmatism and moving forward. The key issue for Russia is to get the Ukraine war solved. And that means ending and removing the root cause of the war as the Russians see them. Doesn't matter if you disagree or not. It's like having this discussion, we can't do a deal on territory because, I mean, look, deals are done on territory every day. There's a deal being done on Greenland right now, which is essentially a deal on territory where the Americans will basically control Greenland economically and militarily, much like it now does in Venezuela. So this is the realpolitik of what's going to happen. Great powers don't tolerate threats on their borders, and that's a direct quote from a man I'm a great fan of, Professor John Mearsheimer, and he's absolutely correct. And whether you like it or not, might is right now. In 2026, might is right. I mean, I composed a very interesting little meme where Kim Jong-un is walking away from one of his vast ballistic missiles with his arm around his daughter. It's a famous photograph. And I wrote on the bottom, now you see why daddy built a nuclear weapon, Yeah. And it's true. That's
North Korea is fine. North Korea is fine.
That's the reality right now is that Pakistan, India, Israel, of course, which possesses a nuclear weapon, but we're not meant to know that. It confers a huge amount of risk on somebody like Donald Trump wanting to park their tanks on your lawn. You're just not going to do it. You're going to move on to a more, let's say, flexible option. So this is the reality in 2026, and it's becoming apparent. And all the shock and awe from these, dare I say it, liberal delusionists in Europe who've been sort of believing in this vacuous rule-based order, which allows them to look the other way in a place like Iraq, where 1 million people died for a lie, where it allows them to say, we're defending freedom in Afghanistan by killing 50,000 civilians. This rules-based order, it never existed. And people like us, like me, I've been pointing that out, that this is an a la carte, a Bible of a la carte morality that you can sort of deploy as it suits you. If we deem you to be bad, we're going to either, activate a CIA, playbook regime change operation, as the Americans have done for decades in South America.
We're seeing in Iran right now. They're doing the same playbook.
As we've seen in Iran, for now it's been contained, it seems. So this is just this a la carte morality, and what's most interesting is to see the Europeans really looking at each other palely, saying, "Oh my God, so the Americans could do this to us too." Like, if you breed a tiger and you feed that tiger to the point that you make him so hungry looking at you through the bars of the cage, one day he breaks out. It's much like what happened in Palestine. You keep people in an open air prison for decades. You radicalize them. You allow that to happen, and then they break out on October 7th, as they did, and horrifically terrible things happen to civilians, which I condemn. All violence against civilians. When that happens, when you build a zoo and you fill it with young tigers and they break out, they're not going to come and make sandwiches for you. So don't expect them to. Same thing happens in some sense to the United States. The United States has built itself up as this utterly impervious country who threatened to bomb the International Criminal Court.
Over Netanyahu, right? Over Netanyahu.
Over Netanyahu, who also says, you'll do as you're told, or we'll economically destroy you, which they've done to many countries, or you'll allow us to transit your territory, you'll sell us your goods, the United States owns the global currency. So they can cripple you through economics, or they can destroy you with their vast military. And then they can use this rules-based order to say, yes, here's the sort of victim card. Palestinians die, Israelis are killed, Russians attack, we secure. That's how it works. So anybody who ever believed this thing is either lying now when the Americans say, well, we're going to have Greenland and we might have Canada next. Anyone who pretends they're surprised by that is either a fool or a liar.
Last question, Chay Bowes. Check the link down below to follow him on X. My last question: does Russia believe that it can trust Trump? When back during the elections, Medvedev came out and he called Trump. This is back in 2024. Medvedev said Trump is an establishment insider at the end of the day. That's what he posted on X. And Trump, we see, he's still providing intelligence to the Ukrainians. He's still hitting Russia with sanctions. Is Trump someone that Putin and Russia believe that they can trust?
Well, look, first, I don't speak for the Russian. I'm not a Russian. I live in Russia. I work in Russia. I may have some views.
Oh, no, I mean, from your opinion. I'm sorry, I didn't word that well.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's what I think, right? The Russians are exceptionally careful people. I mean, when you come to live in Russia, okay, as an Irish guy, right? Irish Americans. I mean, we're the same people in many ways. Italians, Irish. We're kind of this glue pot, right? But the Russians are kind of different. They're different in this way. The default position of Russians in everything, and this is my own personal experience, is skepticism. They're skeptical of everything. They're skeptical of their own government. They're skeptical of what they've been told about history and the future and the past. They're very skeptical people. They tend to base their opinions of individuals and events on experience, which is not like us in the West. We tend to be very sort of forgiving in many ways, but the Russians are very unforgiving, because if there's any country on earth that knows war, conflict, suffering, privation, famine, it's the Soviet people and the Russians. They have been through the most horrendous conflicts, from the invasions of the Mongol hordes, which set back Russia by maybe 200 or 300 years, to the Second World War, which was a generation-shattering conflict in Russia. 27 million people. It's almost incomprehensible, the scale. And in my view, that has kind of hardwired the Russian psyche to be exceptionally skeptical and demand, facts and base. And that's what the Russians have been like this all the way since February 22, when Vladimir Putin announced he was going to go into Ukraine. Nothing has changed about the Russian position from what he said he was going to do: denazify, demilitarize, and essentially prevent this war happening again. Nothing has changed. I'm dismayed as how people kind of have this idea, the Russians don't want this, they don't want that. It's like you go into a shop and you ask for strawberry ice cream. They can offer you every other flavor, but unless they give you the strawberry ice cream, you're not getting what you want. And the Russians won't accept apple, banana. They want the strawberry ice cream, so give it to us. And they're going to remain silent until someone produces this strawberry ice cream for them. So in my view, do they trust Donald Trump? I would suggest they trust the mechanisms of the United States legal system and political system, whereby agreements that are signed by Mr. Trump will be viable and valid for the next president, as many laws are passed on from president to president. I don't think it's about an issue of Trump. I think it's about, do you trust this machine, which has predicated much of its power on its ability to exert influence economically and militarily? Do you trust them, or do you trust you have what you hold? I think the Russians have learned, as many countries are learning now, the Europeans are learning now, that, as I said it earlier, might is right. It's what you have you hold. It's what ability you have to defend yourself that matters. And we're going into almost a medieval reality with a tripolar world: the United States, China, and Russia as the big powers. And everybody's going to have to kind of pick a team to some respect. The Europeans are trapped in that they're so aligned to America. They're so, it's like a tree and a railing that have grown in together in the post-war period. They took a lot of money from the Americans to rebuild Europe. And it was the Europeans that destroyed themselves, remember. It wasn't the Americans they tried to keep out of the Second World War, as they tried to keep out of the First World War. So some of what Mr. Trump is saying is true. So here's the reality. Everyone's going to have to pick a side. The Russians and the Chinese are aligning themselves with the Iranians and with some Middle East countries who are playing in the middle. But the Europeans have only one place to go. They can't come to Russia because they've professed they'd die in pools of their own blood before they'd ever even talk to Mr. Putin again or the Russian leadership. So they're stuck with the big Don. And it's almost comedic to see them trying to convince themselves that they're going to be able to do a deal with them, because in reality, what the big Don wants, the big Don is going to get. And it's either we're going to buy it from you, or we're going to take it from you, or we're going to make life so uncomfortable for you that you're going to give it to us anyway. That's basically the law of the jungle right now. And I don't see the Chinese or the Russians stepping in anytime soon to stop the party. Why would they? I mean, these are the protagonists in concerted efforts to antagonize Taiwan against China, to antagonize Ukraine against Russia. So I don't think anyone's sitting back and saying, "Oh, this is great on this side of the world," but they're sitting back and saying, "You know, you make your bed, you lie in it. You know, nobody's going to come to your aid now. But maybe you should turn back on Nord Stream, which your friends blew up for you. Maybe because America is now selling very expensive liquefied natural gas to the Europeans at twice the price that they were getting very clean and stable energy supplies too. So they're masters of their own destiny in many ways, in Europe in particular. But will much change? Oh, the good stuff will be kept when the new president comes in. If there's a Democrat, the good stuff will be kept. I don't see them. If Greenland became part of the United States territory, it would be very much a case that the new Democrat president would say, "Well, it's impossible for us to hand it back."
Yeah.
Okay. So the good bits will be kept, and the bad bits will be cast aside. That's my view. But regarding Russia and China, who remember, China is the biggest manufacturing economy of the earth. Most of America's goods are made in China. The idea that you can sanction China into submission is absolutely ludicrous. Just like the idea that you could bend Russia to your will, with these sanctions was ludicrous. It was a self-belief in propaganda, which hasn't even educated people like Lindsey Graham. They still want to bomb everybody into friendship. It doesn't work out too well.
Chay Bowes, thanks for joining the Trends Journal. I appreciate it.
Thanks to you for having me.